If you're anything like me, you probably have a ton of paper scraps in your stash. So we're going to create some fun crafts using up some of those scraps we have in our stash. I'm going to be using some mixed media paper for this first project. You want a cardstock that's nice and sturdy and that can take some liquid really well. I'm going to choose a selection of some of my scrap papers. A lot of these scraps were old experiments or just like bits from projects that I have worked on over the years. I mean, this is an old pile of scrap paper. I've got all my scraps all picked out. Now I'm just going to tear them down into some more usable sizes. I've got some old napkin and some magazine sheets, some scrapbook paper, some old ledger paper, cardstock, you name it, I've got in this pile. So I'm just going to work through this. Again, just tearing them down into smaller sizes and deciding on my color combination that I also want to use for this particular project. Once you have your selection of papers all picked out, you're going to need some decoupage glue. So I'm just using the Craftsmart brand here. You can use any brand that you like. You're going to apply some of the glue to your mixed media paper or whichever cardstock you're using. Put your paper into place and put another layer of your decoupage glue over top. You're also going to want to start to choose some of your papers that you're using and overlap them over your other pieces. And you're going to need to make sure you've got enough glue underneath and on top. You don't want it too heavily saturated, but if you don't have enough glue, then it's going to bubble quite a bit. I don't mind a bit of bubbling, but I don't want it to be so bad that my paper is going to end up coming off later on. So I'm going to just continue to add my papers and layer them, adding my glue. I'm not going right up to the edge of my paper. I'm going to use the white around it kind of as a frame. I'm also going to start to layer some of my napkin and tissue over some of this. We're just creating a really fun collage, just kind of messy and artful. I love to do this. This is such a fun way to use up scraps. You could do a larger version. That's called a masterboard, and that could be used for all kinds of really fun projects, especially if you have a lot of scrap paper such as I do. Look how beautiful this is. I really like the pop of color, but I'm going to show you what I'll be doing with that in a bit. First of all, I am going to use my Cricut machine to cut out this leaf pattern. Originally, I was going to go with a light gray color, but I decided to change that up. I'll show you what color I end up using instead, but I'm going to show you both examples to show you what it looks like on my collaged paper. So here's the green that I ended up going with. I'm just going to peel it off the mat. I am using the new Cricut Joy Extra machine. I am loving this machine so much. All right, so here you can see the gray. I'm not totally crazy about how it's popping off the page. I feel like it's just not enough. I love the green. I think that's gorgeous, but I felt like I need to tone my background down. So I'm going to use some Deco Art Vintage Effects whitewash. I'm just going to use a rag and just apply that onto the papers. And you can kind of see here how it tones down that color. It just helps to just kind of bring it all together so it doesn't look so mishmashed. And that will also help my leaf pattern here to pop so much better. I'm so much happier with that. I've got an altered clipboard that I have done in a previous video. I'll have that link down in the description box if you want to see how I did that. But you can see that my mixed media paper here did not fit. So I'm going to trim it down to size so it will fit on my clipboard. I'm also going to make sure I keep a nice border around the edge. You can see how much easier that fits, and this is a great way to display some art because you can continually change it out. So I'm just going to decide here on which way I want my leaf pattern to go, and then I'm going to use some tacky glue, and I'm adding some little dabs here and there on my leaf pattern. I'm going to spread it out. You can use your finger, a paintbrush, whatever you have. You want to work quickly because this glue will set up fast. I really like to use tacky glue for projects like this. I find that it is a really effective glue. So I'm going to put my leaf pattern into place, and then I'm going to put some weight on the top of it, allow it to set up, and then it's ready to be put on display. I think it turned out gorgeous. Such a fun way to use up our scraps. So this is some sticker paper. This is a project I had done a while ago. I will have the video tutorial on how I did this down in the description box below for you, but it is doing the exact same technique as I did on my mixed media paper, except I'm using sticker paper. You can use this with a die cutting machine, your Cricut machine, or as you could see here, I used a paper punch. It is, again, another really fun way to use up your scraps, and you've got some unique stickers for any project. So I'm going through my stash of papers. This time again, I am selecting some thinner papers here. So I've got some thin scrapbook paper, some ledger paper, book paper, some music sheet paper, even some magazine pieces. I'm going to be working on a flat, sturdy board. You'll also need a metal ruler, a glue stick, and a craft knife. So we are going to create some paper beads. This piece here is a magazine piece, or sorry, actually a calendar strip that I had left over from a previous project. I'm going to cut this down to a long triangular shape. I'm not measuring this. You can if you want. You want the base to be approximately 1 inch wide, and you can see how we just trim it up so it forms a narrow peak. I'm also going to glue together some book pages to create a longer strip, and then you want to make sure you burnish that edge down. I want to make sure that I've got a good bond between those pieces of paper, and I set it aside to allow it to set. Here is some ledger paper. I'm just going to trim off any of the rough edges. I find it easier to create paper beads if you've got a symmetrical sides or edges. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue to cut down some strips here. You can do or use some thicker papers, but I do find that making paper beads, it is a lot easier using some thinner papers. So here I am cutting my book page down now that the glue has set, and you can see I'm just creating a long straight strip, but this one is approximately 1 centimeter wide. Again, I didn't measure, I'm just winging it. I'm okay if things are slightly imperfect. I just think that it adds to the artistic appeal. So now you're going to need a bamboo skewer. You can also get some special tools to create paper beads that have got a slit in the rod. I just use a bamboo skewer and I just work directly on that. So you're going to add some glue and start to roll the paper as tight as you can onto itself. You want to continue to add some glue onto the strip of paper like you see me doing here, and then roll it. You'll want to add glue every once in a while to your strip of paper and continue to roll it as tight as you can and as evenly as you can to create your paper bead. We will be doing one more step to help secure it all together in a bit, but in the meantime, we're going to continue to make our beads, and then we will move on to our next step. Here I am going to do a different shape. So this is the calendar sheet. We're starting off with the widest end and we're going to start to roll it. And you want to roll it in a way so that the thin strip remains in the center of our bead. Just take your time doing this. This is a great project to do while you're watching a movie or a crafting video like you're doing right now. And you can make all kinds of fun beads. I have also made fabric beads. I will again have that video linked down below for you to check out if you want to see how you can do that. The fabric beads are really fun too. All right, so we're getting to the end. Continue to add enough glue to help hold down that little tip. It's really important. You do not want this bead to come unraveled. It gets pretty frustrating. I've had that happen and it is not fun. So another way to extend the length of your paper, I'm gonna again wrap my music sheet paper here around my skewer. You can see that this is a thicker bead, or a wider bead, I should say. And I'm gonna continue to apply the glue and roll the strip, but before I get to the end here, I make sure I add some extra glue to the end and then add another piece and extend my paper strip like you see me doing right here, and then I'm gonna continue on. So there's a few variations on how you can extend your paper strips so you've got a nice long strip to create your beads. With the sheet music or book page, you want to remove any piece that may be blank because we want to make sure that our music notes or our words on our book page are showing when we get the end result. So scrapbook paper is another really fun paper to use because it's got all that pattern on it. So I'm just going to do the simple beads here. There are so many tutorials on either Pinterest or on YouTube on different ways that you can create some paper beads. So I definitely suggest that you check those out. So the glue is all set on my paper beads. I've left them on the skewer because I want to now seal them. I'm going to use a combination of some triple thick triple thick varnish by CreArtive, and I am going to use the gloss for this one. So you want to add a coat onto whichever bead you want. I'm going to do the long cylinder ones here. You want to go ahead and apply it all over, including the ends of your beads. That will help prevent it from coming apart. This will add a nice sheen and a thicker coat. Unlike, say, if you were to use decoupage, you can definitely use decoupage glue. So you want to apply that, and then I'm using a cardboard box here, but you can use styrofoam as well. Once you've got all your beads coated with your sealant, you can put that in place and allow them to dry. Here now I'm using some matte varnish, again from CreArtive. This is just plain varnish. It's not like the triple thick variety. Same procedure as before. You want to apply it all over your bead, including the ends, and then you want to set it aside to dry. So here they are all nice and dry. They have turned out so fun. I actually really like the glossy look of these ones. And then I'm going to just show you these ones as well. But one of my kids had created me a bracelet, and I'll show you what it looks like here in a moment. This is a paper bead I had made several years ago, and it's held up really well. Here is that bracelet. It is such a fun piece. You could also use these beads on, say, a bookmark tassel or any project that you can think of. They are a super fun way to use up our scraps. So I wanted to try and use some of my thicker scraps here. So I'm just gonna go through them all. You can see I've got some old cards, projects that I had done over Christmas time. I even have these pieces of some watercolor paper. I was trying to make some watercolor cards, but I folded them wrong. So I'm like, I'm just gonna throw those in my scrap bin. I'm like, but let's use them. Let's try to use these scraps. So I'm going to use these strips of watercolor paper that I had. I'm going to cut them down to size. Cut yours down to any size that works for you. These are some nice long strips. So I believe they were about 2 inches wide, and they were several inches long. I'm sorry, I don't have the measurements. I think they were probably 8.5, but I'm not totally sure. I'm using my scoreboard here, and I'm going to measure every 2 inches. And sorry, I think actually it was 3 inches wide, my paper. I'm sorry, I cannot remember. But every 2 inches I scored my paper. And then you can see the score lines here. But if you do not have a scoreboard, you can measure out every 2 inches using a steel ruler. And then using a bone folder, you want to score along the pencil line that you've created, that you've measured, and then you will have some score marks. All right, so I'm gonna start to fold. I'm gonna create an accordion style fold here. And then I'm going to fold my other piece as well. We are actually going to be attaching these two strips together. We are going to be creating an accordion mini album. They are another really fun way to use up our tiny little scraps that we have in our stash. So I'm just going to try and figure out here how I'm putting them together. So I've got a continuous strip of accordion, and I had to trim off the one end. I did not need that little piece. And then I'm going to glue our strips here together. I'm just going to use a glue stick, but you can use any glue that you like. You just want to make sure that it is a good bond between the strips. So I'm going to attach those, and then you want to let that glue set up a bit before we move on. So now I'm going to go through my stash of assorted decorative papers. These pieces here are, believe it or not, from a Kleenex box, and I thought they would be perfect for something like this. I'm just going to decide on what I want to use, and they were the right size to fit on the ends of my little accordion mini book. So I'm just going to trim them down to size. I will need to trim them down here more once I've got them attached, but for now they are a more usable size. I am going to just continue to use my glue stick to attach everything to my accordion. Before I add my covers though, I wanted to create a closure. So I'm just using some strips of trim, and I'm just going to add that to the middle of each end, and use any trim that you like. I'm using one that's a thinner weight because I didn't want it to pop through the image too much, or pop through the paper too much. So I wanted to use just a thin strip here. I'm adding it to the middle, and I'm going to again just use my tacky glue to put it into place. Allow that to set, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the other end this exact same way as well. I did need to add a knot on each end of my trim because it was fraying a little bit. So just keep that in mind if you do run into that as well. So now I'm going to add my pieces of Kleenex box here onto my covers, onto the ends of my accordion book. Again, I'm just using some tacky glue for this. Some of the papers you will need to use a heavier weight glue, such as a tacky glue, other than your glue stick. And then that way here, you know that the pieces will stay in place. I'm going to go ahead and use a bone folder here just to make sure I've got a really good contact between my two papers. And then I'm going to work on the other end as well. At this point, you could trim it up if you'd like. I sometimes like to just let the glue set before I start trimming it. Once you've got those pieces in place, I'm using some binder clips to help hold it all together while the glue sets. And you could just put some weight on top of this as well, and that will help to set it up as well. The glue has now set. I'm just removing those binder clips, and now you can start to work on the inside. At this point, you could trim up the ends if you'd like, but that's just whenever you feel like doing it. There's no right or wrong to trimming up any of the ends. This is where you can use those really odd little pieces of paper that you may have in your stash. I've got this little tiny piece of scrapbook paper. Again, I'm just going to use my glue stick to adhere these. So I'm just going to put these into place onto each panel. You can do the front and the back side of this accordion album. I'm just going to show you the basic of applying some of the papers into the small little panels. And then I'm going to show you a project that I had done several years ago that's doing the same technique. It's just a different application. It is such a fun project, but it's same technique where you're just using up your scraps and putting them into place and then having fun. This is where you can get really, really artistic with this project and use up any of those tiny little scraps. You can see I'm folding the paper around the edge of one of the panels. That way here I would get a good measurement before I apply it to the panel. It works really well. So here's the base of our accordion mini album. It's all ready to go, ready to get artistic and have fun with it. You can get this as a gift or just use it for your own little artsy experiments. But here is the project that I had originally created. It is an exploding box. Same technique as the little mini accordion, except you can see where I started to get artistic with what I did. So I added different layers, stamping, paints, you name it, even some washi tape. Just get creative with this project. So I cannot unfortunately provide a PDF on how I created this particular exploding box because it was from an art class that I did several years ago. But there are so many tutorials on how to create exploding boxes. Again, just do the same techniques as we had done with the mini album, but add your own artistic flair when you are done putting it all together. I had some failed attempts of some cards in my stash. I had misfolded them. These were some Cricut projects, like Cricut cards, projects that had gone wrong. I'm like, I didn't want them to go to waste. So I'm like, you know what? It would be kind of fun to create a little mini booklet out of these. So I'm just gonna go ahead and layer up some of those cards and put them all together. And then I'm gonna take some paper clips to hold them all together. Again, I wanted to create a fun little booklet. You can use this little booklet, again, the same way that we did with the exploding box in our accordion mini album, or you could just use this if you don't have any cutout parts. You could use this as a little mini journal or whatever you'd like. It's just a fun way to use up some of those attempted cards that you tried to make and they were flops. So I'm going to bind this. I'm going to use a book here and a ruler. I'm going to measure 1 inch in along the spine of our little booklet, and I put a dot right along the spine. I'm going to use a homemade awl, but you could just use anything to poke a hole through your pages into the book, and then you will have a nice hole. You want to punch it through on the other side too, just so that the paper is nice and smooth all the way through. I've got some twine here. I added tape on one end. I'm going to thread that twine through. I went through one side, I'm going to go out the other, and then I'm just going to tie a simple knot. This is such an easy way to bind your pages together, especially since this project isn't too big. So again, I'm just going to tie off a simple knot here. You can use some wax thread. I just used some basic twine that I had in my stash, trimmed off the excess, and then you can take the paper clips off and again, use it for anything you would like. This is just the basic application of how you can put these pieces together. Let me know what you think. This is, again, a really fun way to use up some of those scraps. This is a project I've been wanting to try out for a while. I had this ring blank in my stash and this scrap of some book page that I had used in another project a long time ago. I am placing the ring upside down on the book page and I'm going to trace around it. I wanted to get the shape of the ring base onto the paper and I thought this was the easiest way. I needed to cut it down to size so it would fit on the inside of our ring. So this ring you can use for all kinds of different things, but for this application I needed a little bit of a piece of scrap book page. I'm just going to continue to cut it down till it fits on the inside of my ring. Once you've got the size needed, I'm going to be using some white gesso to cover up the dark background of our ring. Now, I had originally attempted to do this project without this step and it did not turn out, so I definitely recommend lightening up your ring base if you need to. You might not need to do this step, but you could see that mine was a really dark kind of pewter color and it was showing through the paper and I did not want that. So I added about 3 coats of that. Let that dry. I also added some to my paper as well. You want to add 2 to 3 coats and then allow it to dry well. In case you don't know what gesso is, it is a primer that artists use on their substrates for their paintings or such. All right, I'm going to be using some Mod Podge Dimensional Magic. It makes for a great resin substitute. I've had this particular bottle in my stash for several years and it has lasted me a really long time. I applied a little bit to the ring base and then I'm going to be putting my paper into place. Just using a paintbrush to smooth it out. Now the key to using this is that you do not want to shake your bottle. If you shake your bottle, you are going to get air bubbles in it and you do not want air bubbles in your resin look. So I added my paper. And now I'm gonna let that set. I'm using some pressed carrot flowers that I had pressed last summer. It has a very similar look to Queen Anne's lace. It is part of the same family. So I'm just going to trim that down. I'm using some tweezers to figure out my placement. You could add a tiny bit of glue underneath if you'd like, or you could just let it float and it would create a really unique look as well. So once you've got that into place, you can now fill your ring base. Now this ring base does have a little bit of a lip around the edge, so it helps to hold all of our dimensional magic into place. So if you do by chance get an air bubble, it's okay. You can use a little needle to pop those bubbles. You could also use the needle to push the dimensional magic around. So you're gonna let this set up. It sets up in about 3 hours and you can see how beautiful and artistic this ring turned out. I really love it. So we're gonna bust through our scraps again. I am looking for some thinner papers again. I've got quite a few. I'm using an assortment of pages. I've got a bowl that I've covered in some plastic wrap. Now, I should have maybe added like a thin coat of maybe some oil or something to help to release our project once we're done. So keep that in mind, or I have another tip for you. But in the meantime, before we get to that, I'm going to just tear my pages up. I'm also crinkling them. That helps to make them more pliable so they're easy to apply to our bowl. We are going to create a paper mache type look of bowl, except we're doing it decoupage style. So I've got this brown paper. I'm going to set that aside for later on, but you can see the assortment of papers that I have. I'm going to be using some school glue, just some basic white glue. I'm using about 4 parts glue to 1 part water. You just want to make sure that your glue is runnier than typical. Otherwise, it doesn't absorb into the paper and create a nice bond between each other. So I'm going to apply some glue to the bowl and then I'm going to start to add my papers to the bowl. I'm using my finger to mold the paper around the bowl. That will create that look that we want. I have done this before using fabric. Again, I'm going to have that video linked down below in the description for you. I will have a playlist for you of the videos mentioned in this video. I will have that playlist linked at the end of this video that you're watching right now, so definitely stay tuned till the end. So I'm going to just continue to layer my papers, just like you saw me doing with our mixed media paper. You want to layer your pieces, add your glue, and then just continue to layer it, smooth it out best you can so you've got good adhesion between all of your paper pieces. And I'm going to continue to add the paper and then put it upside down on a bottle or set, allow it to set up before you move on. I didn't need to let it fully dry at this point, but I did want it to set up enough so that I'm not moving my papers around while I add my next layer. So this is layer number 2. I'm going to go ahead and just use the assortment of papers that I'm using here. I'm using, again, thinner papers. It will be more difficult to do this project if you were using thicker papers. They just won't mold to your bowl as well as these thinner papers will. So I'm going to have some more paper scrap paper busting projects for you during the summer. So again, just definitely stay tuned. There's going to be some really fun projects. I'm so excited to try them and share them with you. I am also curious, how have you busted through your stash of either fabrics or paper? Let me know in the comments. It gives me lots of ideas if you share with me. If maybe there's some things I had never thought of. So I know there are so many of you who are so crafty and talented out there, and I just love it when you folks share with me. It's just so inspirational. So I ended up adding a total of 3, maybe 4 layers at this point before I allowed it to dry. So just continue to layer up all your papers until you're happy with the look. At this point, I am adding my final decorative layer. This is layer number 4. So I'm being more mindful with my paper placement and the types of paper that I am putting down. So I've got some painted book page, I've got some decorative scrapbook pages, some dictionary pages, and some ledger pages, all in some pretty colors that I wanted to show. I allowed that to set up, and this sat for I think 3, 4, maybe 5 days. And you guys, this is where I discovered my struggle. I had a heck of a time getting this off. And I think what ended up happening is that it ended up shrinking and really clinging to the bowl. So if I had maybe just a slight coat of oil or something to help to release it, or if I should have popped it off before it got too dry and then allowed it to finish drying without being on my bowl mold. But I'm using a metal spatula slipping it between the bowl and the paper and plastic to help to release it. And this did work. It just took me some time. And I was being very careful because I didn't want to tear my bowl. Eventually it did release, and I was so glad. I was getting so frustrated at this point. So learn from my mistake. So this looks pretty cool. There's a slight sheen on the inside. You could leave this as is, but I decided I wanted to use this decorative craft paper. It's leftover from some gift wrap actually. And so I tore it up, and then I'm going to add my final layer to the inside. I'm going to be honest, I actually kind of regret adding this layer. I might end up going in and toning it down a bit. I found that it actually was too dark, and I'll show you why here in a minute. So I haven't decided if I'm going to add like a whitewash to the inside or not. I haven't decided that yet, but I'm just going to show you how it came out as is. But you can see how I'm just layering my paper pieces again, and you can see how it came out really dark. Yes, it's wet at this point, but once it dries, it was really, really dark. You can see that right here. You can trim off the edge with some scissors. I decided to tear it because I wanted that rough, artistic look to it. And there's lots of ways you can finish off the edge, but I just left mine raw as is. These bowls are so fun to use as a decorative element, or I like to use it to store some little pieces here in my craft room. Let me know what your favorite project was by dropping me a comment down below. Check this playlist out for all those videos mentioned within this video. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate each and every one of you. We will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.